Before jumping over to the next lecture and start using App Center, I want to add everything over to GitHub. After all, the entire code that we're adding should be tracked with source code, and we already learned that GitHub is going to be the foundation of the CI/CD process that we're going to start in the next section. So what I will do is add all of the code as we progress through this section and as we progress through the rest of the course over to GitHub for two reasons. One, of course, for the purpose of this course, because we want GitHub to be the foundation of our CI/CD process. But second, because over there you will be able to download all of the code. Every lecture in which we work with some code, we code something, we add something, we'll have that version of the code in the resources here on Udemy. But if you're already familiar with GitHub, I think it is a much better experience to just clone the repository or fork the repository from GitHub and use it. So, for those two purposes, I am going to be uploading everything to GitHub. So far we have already initialized App Center, and in fact, by this initialization itself, our application will already be tracking some events and some crashes. So any type of crash that happens will already be tracked by default. And some events such as the sessions and the basic usage of the application is also tracked by default. Of course, throughout the rest of this section, we're going to learn how to add more details and how to add more things. But just this line of code in here that I divided in three for better readability is enough for our application, for App Center, to start receiving usage information about our application and for crashes to be tracked inside of App Center. So this first version should already be saved and tracked with Git. Now, so far, I am not going to be following my own advice and do everything on master. It is until the next section where we're actually going to be creating the dev and the test branch as well. So in here, if I execute git log, I only see one commit, the initial commit that we created previously. And if I execute git status, I see these changes that I have made. The things that we added to the app class, a couple of changes that I did to the main page, and some changes to the project. So all of these changes, I want to stage them and commit them. So we'll execute git commit -am and set the message to be start App Center or something like that. Commit this, and now this is being tracked. Now I want all of this to be over on GitHub. So for that, I have created this new repository, and this is actually going to be public. So feel entirely free to come here to this repository and fork it to have it on your own GitHub account. Clone it locally and follow the curse by taking a look at all of these commits. You could have, for example, on one side the code that you're building, and on the other side the code that I have built myself to compare if you run into some issues. So with this new repository, I will simply copy the URL and I am going to add it as a remote. So git remote add origin. Origin is going to be the name as most of the times. Now that the remote is there, all I have to do is push everything, and I am going to be setting the upstream already to origin from master. And now all of this code is going to be over here on GitHub. So all I need to do is reload this page, and I see all of this code and the two commits already in here. So again, I am going to be doing this precisely because this is going to be the foundation of the CI/CD process. But in the context of Udemy, of the Udemy course, you will also be able to come here and take a look at the code. And you can do that in two ways. One, the resources in this lecture here on Udemy are going to contain a zip file of the source code that we work with throughout each and every one of the lectures. But the second version, and the one that I recommend that you do use, is here on GitHub. Come over to the commits and take a look at the commits. For example, right now we know that the start App Center commit corresponds to the code that in this case I added in the previous lecture, but just because in this lecture is where I'm explaining things. But what you would do is just click on this commit and see the changes that we made in that particular lecture. So you know if you have all of those changes, and you know if perhaps you made some mistake, or perhaps I made some mistake, and you can actually come here and comment and track some issues in here. So it's going to be very powerful. And what I will do is that most of the commits are actually going to be identifiable by this or by the name of the lecture. So far I already have these two commits, but most of the coming commits are going to have the name of the lecture, so it's easier for you to identify them. Eventually, do keep in mind that I will have more branches in here, so try to follow these branches from the video so you have a better sense about how my commits are being made. But for now, everything is now on GitHub. Again, this is a public repository. Feel free to come here and fork it so you have the version on your own GitHub account. Now let's jump over to the next lecture and start tracking some events. We know that by default with this single line we are already tracking some things, but let's start to learn how to track more than just the default things that App Center tracks by itself with this line that we have already added.